the Alpha King who destroyed his kingdom for a servant. Tonight, I'm bringing you the most dangerous love story ever told in the northern frontier, where one forbidden glance shattered centuries of tradition, and a nameless servant girl became the most powerful queen the wolf packs had ever feared. This is the story of Kael Thornridge, the ruthless Alpha King who abandoned a sacred ritual, broke political alliances, and defied every law of his kind, all for a woman who had no right to even breathe his air. If you love stories of survival, forbidden bonds, and impossible choices, stay until the very end. Drop a comment with your city, hit that like button, and let's begin. The northern frontier didn't forgive mistakes. It was a land carved from stone and ice, where winter arrived like a blade and stayed for months, where wolves ruled and humans served, and where tradition held more weight than blood itself. The great castle of Thornridge stood at the edge of civilization, a fortress of black granite and iron, its towers clawing at the sky like the broken fingers of some ancient god. Inside its walls lived the most feared pack in the north, and at its head sat the most feared alpha of them all. Kael Thornridge. They said he was born in a storm, that his first breath came out as a growl, not a cry, that he'd killed his first rival at 15 and taken the throne at 23, not through inheritance, but through sheer, unrelenting dominance. Some whispered he had ice for blood. Others said he had no heart at all, that it had been carved out the day he became alpha, replaced with something cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. He didn't need to be loud, didn't need to make threats or raise his voice. His presence alone made wolves twice his age lower their eyes and tuck their tails between their legs. When Kael Thornridge entered a room, the air itself seemed to grow thinner, harder to breathe. He ruled with absolute authority. No one challenged him, no one questioned him, and no one dared to break his laws, especially not the law about the sacred choosing ritual. The ritual was ancient, older than the castle itself, older than any living wolf could remember. It happened once every decade, when the alphas of the northern packs gathered to bind themselves to their chosen mates in the old way, blood to blood, soul to soul, before the eyes of the ancestors and the spirits of the wild. It was the most sacred ceremony in wolf culture. To witness it without permission was considered a violation so severe that the punishment was death. No trial, no mercy, just death. And Seren Vale, a nameless servant girl with more guts than sense, was about to break that law. She hadn't planned it. That's what she'd tell herself later when the world came crashing down around her ears. She hadn't wanted to sneak into the eastern wing, hadn't wanted to risk her neck for something as stupid as a dare. But Mira had goaded her. Mira was one of the kitchen girls, sharp-tongued, quick-witted, and mean as a viper when she wanted to be. She and Seren had never exactly been friends, but they'd worked side by side for 3 years now, scrubbing pots and hauling water and staying invisible the way servants were supposed to. Most days that was enough. Most days they kept their heads down and survived. But tonight, Mira had been in a mood. "You're scared," she'd said, her dark eyes glittering with malice as they stood in the shadows of the kitchen courtyard. "You talk a big game, Vale, but you're scared of everything." Seren had bristled. "I'm not scared. Prove it." "How?" Mira had leaned in close, her breath smelling of wine she'd stolen from the cellars. "The ritual's happening tonight, Eastern Hall. You sneak in, get a glimpse of the alphas, and come back. That's it, 5 minutes. If you do it, I'll cover your shifts for a month. If you don't—" She'd grinned, slow and wicked. "Then everyone knows you're nothing but talk." It was a trap, of course. Seren knew that. Mira wanted her to refuse, wanted to humiliate her in front of the other servants, and Seren should have walked away, should have laughed it off and gone back to her quarters. But she'd been tired of being invisible, tired of being nothing. So she'd said yes. Now, crouched in the darkness beyond the firelight of the Eastern Hall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, Seren was realizing just how monumentally stupid that decision had been. The hall was massive, easily the largest room in the castle, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadow and walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting wolves in battle, in hunt, in triumph. Torches flickered along the stone pillars, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. At the center of the room stood a circle of wolves, 12 alphas, each one accompanied by their chosen mate. They were dressed in ceremonial garb, leather and fur and silver, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light as their wolves stirred just beneath their skin. And at the head of them all stood Kyle Thornridge. Seren's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen him before, of course. Everyone in the castle had. He didn't hide himself away like some rulers did. He walked the grounds, inspected the guard rotations, oversaw the training yards. But Seren had never been this close to him, had never seen him like this. He stood bare-chested in the firelight, the ceremonial markings painted across his skin in dark ink, symbols she didn't recognize, old and powerful. His body was a map of violence. Scars crisscrossed his torso, his arms, each one a story of survival. His hair was dark, almost black, falling just past his broad shoulders. His face was all hard lines and sharp angles, handsome in the way a blade was handsome, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. But it was his eyes that trapped her, pale gray, like winter frost. Cold. Calculating. Eyes that had seen too much blood and felt too little regret. He was terrifying. And Seren couldn't look away. The eldest alpha, a silver-haired wolf named Corvin, stepped forward and raised his hands. His voice echoed through the hall, deep and resonant. Tonight we honor the old ways. Tonight the chosen are bound to their alphas and the bloodlines are strengthened. Let no outsider witness this sacred bond. Let no impurity taint what we create here. Impurity. The word hit Seren like a slap. That's what they called people like her. Humans, servants, the ones who didn't shift, who didn't carry wolf blood in their veins, the ones who existed only to serve, to stay quiet, to be nothing. She should leave, right now, before anyone noticed. But something held her there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the same reckless streak that had gotten her into this mess in the first place. Or maybe it was the way the firelight caught on Kyle's skin, the way he stood so still and yet seemed to radiate power like heat from a forge. Corvin continued speaking, his words flowing in the old tongue, a language Seren didn't understand but could feel deep in her bones. The alphas began to move, circling their chosen mates, their movements ritualistic and precise. One by one, they knelt. One by one, they pressed their foreheads together, and Seren saw the flash of their eyes, gold, amber, burning bright. The bond was forming. And then Kyle moved. It was subtle. Just a slight shift of his weight, a tilt of his head. But every wolf in the room went still. His nostrils flared, his jaw tightened. His eyes, which had been focused on the ritual, suddenly snapped to the side, straight to the darkness, straight to her. Serene's blood turned to ice. No, 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 no! She didn't move, didn't breathe. Maybe he wasn't looking at her. Maybe he'd sensed something else, a draft, a sound, anything but her. Maybe if she stayed perfectly still, he'd look away. But Kyle didn't look away. His eyes narrowed, and Seren felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. The air in the room seemed to change, grow thicker, charged with something dangerous. And then his lips pulled back just slightly. She saw the edge of a fang. Panic exploded through her chest. Seren spun on her heel and ran. She didn't think, didn't plan. She just bolted down the corridor, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone, her heart slamming into her ribs so hard it hurt. Behind her she heard shouting, voices raised in shock and confusion. And then she heard it, a growl, low, guttural, inhuman. "The Alpha!" someone shouted. "He's shifting!" No, that couldn't be right. Alphas didn't abandon rituals. They didn't break tradition. It was unthinkable, impossible. But the growl came again, closer this time, and Seren knew with cold, creeping certainty that the impossible was happening. Kyle Thornridge was hunting her. She tore through the corridor, her lungs burning, her vision blurring at the edges. The castle was a maze. She knew that better than most. 3 years of hauling trays and scrubbing floors and learning every servant's passage, every hidden shortcut. If she could just get to the eastern stairwell, she could lose him. She could disappear into the lower levels, into the kitchens, into the places where alphas never went. She rounded a corner and nearly crashed into a serving cart left abandoned in the hall. She shoved it aside, kept running. Her legs screamed in protest. Her chest heaved. But she didn't stop. Behind her, she heard the sound of claws on stone. "He's coming!" The thought was so surreal it almost made her laugh. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the north, chasing a servant girl through his own castle in the middle of the most sacred ceremony of the decade. She was dead. She was so dead. The corridor opened into the main courtyard, and Seren burst through the door into the night air. The cold hit her like a fist. Winter was coming early this year, and the wind cut through her thin servant's dress like it was made of paper. The moon hung low and full, casting silver light across the cobblestones, illuminating the courtyard in stark, cold detail. Beyond the courtyard walls lay the wilderness, the great stretch of forest that surrounded the castle, dark and endless and deadly. If she could get to the trees, she might have a chance, might be able to hide, to lose him in the shadows. Seren sprinted toward the gate, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could see it, the iron bars, the gap just wide enough for a person to slip through if they were desperate enough. She was desperate enough. But then a shadow moved at the edge of her vision, fast, too fast. Seren veered left, her feet skidding on the uneven cobblestones. She nearly lost her balance, windmilled her arms, caught herself. Behind her, the shadow grew larger, darker, and she heard the low rumble of a growl that made every hair on her body stand on end. She glanced back, and immediately wished she hadn't. Kael's wolf was massive, easily twice the size of any normal wolf, with fur black as midnight and eyes that glowed pale silver in the moonlight. He moved with terrifying grace, his massive paws silent on the stone despite his size. He wasn't running at full speed, wasn't even trying. He was toying with her. Seren's foot caught on a loose stone, and she went down hard. Her palms scraped against the cobblestones, and pain flared up her arms. Blood welled from the cuts, dark and wet. She forced herself up, her hands shaking, her whole body trembling. And then Kael stopped. He stood at the far end of the courtyard, his massive wolf form outlined in moonlight, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't advance, didn't snarl, just stood there, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl and her pulse race for reasons she didn't want to examine. Seren backed toward the gate, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't supposed to." Kael's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that could tear her throat out in half a second. And then he lunged. Seren screamed and threw herself to the side. She felt the rush of air as he passed, felt the heat radiating from his body. And then she was scrambling to her feet and running again, through the gate, into the forest, branches whipping at her face and arms. The trees closed around her like jaws. The forest was ancient here, older than the castle, older than the wolves themselves. The trunks were massive, wide as houses, their roots twisting across the forest floor like the veins of some sleeping giant. Moonlight barely penetrated the canopy, leaving the ground shrouded in shadow. Seren ran until her legs gave out, until her lungs burned and her vision swam, until the world tilted sideways and she couldn't tell which way was up. Her foot caught on a root and she went down. This time, she kept falling. The ground disappeared beneath her, and suddenly she was tumbling down a steep embankment, rocks and branches tearing at her skin, her body slamming into tree trunks and boulders. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but her hands found only air. Her head cracked against something solid. Stars exploded behind her eyes. And then everything went dark. Seren didn't know how long she was out. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. When consciousness finally dragged her back to the surface, the first thing she felt was pain. It radiated through her entire body, her ribs, her back, her head. Her left ankle throbbed with a deep, sickening ache that told her something was badly wrong. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. Agony lanced through her side, sharp enough to make her gasp. She forced her eyes open. She was lying at the bottom of a ravine, surrounded by rocks and broken branches. Above her, the moonlight filtered through the trees in thin silver threads. The air was cold enough to hurt, and she realized with a distant sort of horror that she was shivering violently. "Get up. You have to get up." She tried. Truly she did. But her body wouldn't cooperate. Her arms shook when she tried to push herself upright. Her head spun, and when she tried to put weight on her left ankle, white-hot pain shot up her leg and she collapsed back down with a strangled cry. For a long moment, Seren just lay there, staring up at the sky through the canopy, trying to breathe through the pain and the fear and the crushing realization that she was going to die out here. No one would come looking for her. No one would care. She was just a servant, just another nameless girl who'd made a stupid mistake and paid the price. This is how it ends. But then she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of breathing, not her own. Someone, something else. Seren's head snapped to the side, pain be damned, and her heart stopped. There, standing at the edge of the ravine, was the wolf. Kael. He was still in his wolf form, his massive body outlined against the night sky. But something had changed. He wasn't snarling, wasn't preparing to attack. He just stood there, his pale eyes fixed on her, his head tilted slightly as if he were trying to figure out a puzzle. Serene's throat closed up. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, but her body was broken, and even if it wasn't, there was nowhere to go. She was trapped. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracked. "Please, just make it quick." The wolf didn't move. Seren squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. Waiting for teeth and claws and the final brutal snap that would end her miserable existence. But it didn't come. Instead, she heard the sound of bones shifting, cracking, reshaping. She opened her eyes. The wolf was gone. In its place stood a man. Kael Thornridge, naked and powerful and utterly unbothered by the cold, stood at the edge of the ravine looking down at her. The moonlight caught on his skin, highlighting every scar, every line of muscle. His hair fell around his face, dark and wild. And his eyes, those pale, frost-colored eyes, were fixed on her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe for reasons that had nothing to do with her broken ribs. He took a step forward, and Seren flinched. "Don't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't come any closer." Kael stopped. His jaw tightened. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding, your ankle's broken, and you probably have a concussion." His voice was low, rough, like gravel grinding together. "You're not fine." Seren tried to push herself upright again and failed. Pain lanced through her side, and she bit back a cry. "Why do you care?" Something flickered across Kael's face, something she couldn't name. "I don't know yet." He descended into the ravine with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his entire life in the wilderness. Within seconds, he was crouched beside her, and Seren's heart kicked into overdrive. "Don't touch me," she said, trying to sound firm and only managing to sound terrified. Kael's eyes narrowed. "I'm not going to hurt you. You chased me through the castle. You hunted me into the forest. You ran." His voice was flat, emotionless. "What was I supposed to do?" "Let me go." "I did." Seren blinked. "What?" Kael leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "If I'd wanted to catch you in the courtyard, I would have. If I'd wanted to kill you, you'd already be dead." He paused, and something dangerous flickered in his gaze. "I wanted to see how far you'd run." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and loaded with meaning Seren couldn't begin to unpack. She stared at him, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why does it matter?" Kael was silent for a long moment, and then he did something that shocked her more than anything else that had happened tonight. He reached out, slowly, carefully, and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His touch was surprisingly gentle, warm. "You shouldn't have been there," he said quietly. "I know. You broke the oldest law we have. I know." And yet, his hand lingered near her cheek, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. "I can't bring myself to punish you for it." Seren's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Kael's eyes searched hers, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Seren saw something other than cold calculation in his gaze. She saw confusion, frustration, something raw and almost vulnerable. "I don't know," he admitted, "but something happened tonight, when I caught your scent in the hall, when our eyes met." He paused, his jaw working. "My wolf recognized you." The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. Seren shook her head, immediately regretted it, as pain lanced through her skull. "That's impossible. I'm just a servant. I'm not even a wolf." "I know." Kael's voice was rough now, edged with something that might have been frustration. "That's what makes this so damn complicated. He pulled back, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. For a moment he just stood there, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm going to send someone for you," he said finally. "A healer. They'll bring you back to the castle." "No." The word came out sharper than Seren intended. "No, I can't go back there. They'll kill me. The law is mine to interpret." Kael's voice was hard now, final. "And I say you live." "Why?" Seren demanded, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" Kael stared at her for a long moment, and then, instead of answering, he turned and walked away. "Wait," Seren called after him, trying to push herself up and failing. "Wait, you can't just—" But he was already gone, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, as if he'd never been there at all. Leaving Seren alone at the bottom of the ravine, bleeding and broken, with one impossible truth burning in her chest, the Alpha King had spared her life, but she had no idea what price she'd have to pay for it. True to his word, the healers came. Seren didn't know how much time had passed. Could have been an hour, could have been 3, but eventually she heard voices calling through the forest. Torchlight flickered between the trees, and then there were hands on her, gentle but firm, lifting her onto a stretcher. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. Older, calm. "You've got a few broken bones, but nothing we can't fix." Seren tried to speak, tried to ask what was happening, but her body was done fighting. Exhaustion pulled at her like a tide, and she let herself sink into it. When she woke again, she was in a bed. Not her bed. Her quarters were a tiny room in the servants' wing, barely large enough for a cot and a trunk. This bed was huge, soft, with clean white sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. Sunlight streamed through a window, warm and golden. Serene's heart kicked into panic mode. She tried to sit up and immediately gasped as pain flared through her ribs. "Don't move!" The same calm voice from before. Seren turned her head and saw a middle-aged woman sitting in a chair beside the bed, her gray hair pulled back in a bun, her hands folded in her lap. She wore the simple robes of a castle healer. "You've got 3 cracked ribs, a broken ankle, and a concussion. You're lucky to be alive." "Where am I?" Seren croaked. "The East Wing. Guest quarters." Guest quarters. Not the dungeons. Not a cell. Guest quarters. "I don't understand," Seren whispered. "I broke the law. I should be—" The Alpha gave orders. The healer's expression was unreadable. "You're under his protection now. No one's to touch you." The word should have been a relief. Instead, they sent ice crawling down Seren's spine. "For how long?" The healer stood, gathering her supplies. "That's not for me to say." She paused at the door, glancing back. "But if I were you, girl, I'd be very, very careful. The Alpha King doesn't spare people out of kindness. Whatever reason he has for keeping you alive, you're going to have to earn it." And then she was gone, leaving Seren alone with her thoughts and her fears and the terrifying knowledge that her life now belonged to Kael Thornridge, whether she wanted it to or not. The whispers started before Seren could even walk. She spent 3 days in that guest room, her body healing slower than the healer had predicted. The ribs were the worst. Every breath felt like someone was driving a knife between her bones. Her ankle was wrapped tight, elevated on pillows, throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that made sleep nearly impossible. But it wasn't the pain that kept her awake at night. It was the voices in the hallway. Servants came and went, bringing food she barely touched. Fresh bandages, water for washing. They never looked at her directly. Never spoke unless spoken to. But Seren heard them talking once they thought they were far enough down the corridor. "Did you hear? The Alpha abandoned the ritual. For her, a human servant. It's unnatural. He should have killed her on sight. Maybe he's keeping her alive for something worse." The last comment made Seren's stomach turn. She didn't know what was worse, the idea that Kael had spared her out of cruelty, or the fact that she had no idea what he wanted from her at all. On the 4th day, the healer declared her well enough to move around. "Keep weight off that ankle for another week," the woman said, her tone clipped and professional. "And don't do anything stupid. The Alpha wants you alive. I'd prefer to keep it that way." "Where is he?" Seren asked before she could stop herself. The healer paused at the door, dealing with the consequences of his choices. She glanced back, her expression unreadable. "Same as you should be." And then she was gone. Seren spent the next hour staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She needed to leave, needed to get as far from this castle as possible before whatever protection Kael had given her ran out. But where would she go? She had no family, no money, no skills beyond scrubbing floors and keeping her head down. The frontier was brutal to people like her. Lone women without protection didn't last long in the wild. She was trapped. The realization settled over her like a shroud. A knock at the door made her jump. Before she could answer, it opened, and a young woman stepped inside. She was tall, elegant, with sharp cheekbones and auburn hair pulled back in an intricate braid. She wore a dress of deep emerald silk, and the way she carried herself screamed nobility. Seren's instincts kicked in immediately. She tried to stand, winced, settled for sitting up straighter. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" "Sit." The woman's voice was cool, clipped. She closed the door behind her and studied Seren with eyes that were too sharp, too calculating. "So you're the one causing all this chaos?" Seren's throat tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play stupid." The woman crossed the room in 3 graceful strides and stood at the foot of the bed. "The entire castle is talking about you. The servant girl who broke into the sacred ritual, the one the Alpha King abandoned everything to chase." She tilted her head. "Tell me, was it worth it?" "It was an accident," Seren said quietly. "I never meant—" "Accident!" The woman laughed, sharp and bitter. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Kael Thornridge has ruled this territory with absolute authority for 6 years. 6 years without a single challenge to his power. And in one night, you made him look weak." Seren flinched. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No one ever does." The woman moved closer, and Seren could see the anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. "I'm Lady Seraphine Moorgrave. Perhaps you've heard of me?" Seren had. Everyone had. Lady Seraphine was the daughter of Lord Moorgrave, who controlled the southern territory. She was powerful, beautiful, and according to castle gossip, engaged to be Kael's political match. The alliance would unite the northern and southern pacts, creating a power block that no one would dare challenge, or at least it had been. "The engagement," Seren whispered. "Is it delayed?" Seraphine's smile was cold. "Indefinitely, because our dear Alpha King has more pressing matters to attend to." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You." "I don't want anything from him," Seren said, hating how her voice shook. "I just want to leave." "Too late for that." Seraphine straightened, smoothing her dress. "You're a problem now. And problems in this world get dealt with one way or another." She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. "Enjoy the guest quarters while you can, girl. They won't last." And then she was gone, leaving Seren alone with her fear and the growing certainty that she was drowning in something far deeper than she'd ever imagined. 2 days later, Seren was summoned. A guard appeared at her door, a massive wolf with scars across his face and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "The Alpha wants to see you." Seren's heart kicked into her throat. "Now?" Now. She'd been given fresh clothes, a simple dress in deep gray, nothing fancy but far nicer than the servant's rags she'd worn before. Her ankle was still weak, but she managed to walk with only a slight limp. The guard led her through the castle, and Seren felt the weight of every stare, every whisper as they passed servants and nobles alike. They hated her. She could feel it radiating off them in waves. The guard brought her to a room she'd never seen before, a study, lined with maps and weapons, a massive desk dominating the center. And behind that desk stood Kael Thornridge. He was dressed now, thank God, black leather and wool, his hair pulled back from his face. He looked tired, Seren noticed. There were shadows under his eyes, tension in his shoulders. He'd been dealing with fallout, she realized, because of her. "Leave us," Kael said without looking at the guard. The guard hesitated. "Alpha, I don't think what?" "Leave." The guard left. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Seren stood near the door, her hands clasped in front of her, trying not to look as terrified as she felt. "Sit," Kael said finally, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Seren limped forward and sat. She kept her eyes down, the way servants were supposed to. "Look at me." She lifted her gaze. Kael was watching her with that same intensity from the forest, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces to. How's your ankle? He asked. The question caught her off guard. It's healing. Good. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. I suppose you've heard the rumors by now. Seren swallowed hard. Some of them. Then you know what position you've put me in. I didn't mean to. I know. Kale's voice was flat, emotionless. But intent doesn't matter. Actions do. I abandoned a sacred ritual to chase you. I spared your life when the law demanded your death. And now the entire Northern Territory is questioning my authority. He paused. Do you understand what that means? Seren nodded slowly. I'm a threat to your power. Yes. Kyle stood, moving to the window. He stared out at the courtyard below, his hands clasped behind his back. The council wants you executed. Lady Seraphine wants you exiled. And the Southern Territory is threatening to withdraw their alliance entirely if I don't deal with you appropriately. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. So do it, Seren heard herself say. Execute me. It's what the law demands. Kale turned, his eyes sharp. Is that what you want? No. The word came out stronger than she expected. But if it's a choice between my life and war between territories, then it's not your choice to make. Kael crossed the room in 3 strides and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I don't know what this is between us. I don't understand it, but my wolf recognized you that night, and that means something. I'm not a wolf, Seren whispered. How is that even possible? I don't know. Frustration bled into his voice. I've consulted with the elders, the healers, anyone who might have answers. No one does. This has never happened before. Then maybe it's a mistake. Maybe your wolf was confused, or my wolf is never confused. Kale's jaw tightened, and neither am I, about this. You were meant to be there that night. I was meant to find you. For what purpose? I don't know yet. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. But I'm going to find out. Seren's hands clenched in her lap. And what happens to me in the meantime? Kyle was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that made her blood run cold. You're going to stay here, under my protection, until I figure out what you are. I'm nothing, Seren said desperately. Just a servant, if you were nothing, I wouldn't have chased you. Kyle's eyes burned into hers. If you were nothing, my wolf wouldn't have stopped in the middle of a sacred ritual. If you were nothing, I wouldn't be risking everything to keep you alive. The intensity in his voice made something in Serene's chest tighten. She wanted to argue, to protest, to tell him he was making a mistake. But the words wouldn't come. I have enemies now, she said quietly. Because of you. I know. They'll try to kill me. Let them try. The words were simple, absolute. Anyone who touches you answers to me. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any threat Seraphine had made. Life in the castle became a waking nightmare. Seren was moved from the guest quarters to a room in the upper wing, closer to Kael's chambers, though she tried not to think about what that meant. The room was larger, better furnished, with a window that overlooked the training yards. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt like a prisoner. The servants wouldn't talk to her anymore. They brought her meals in silence, cleaned her room without making eye contact, and hurried away as fast as possible. The nobles were worse. They stared at her with open contempt, whispering behind their hands whenever she passed. Only one person spoke to her directly, and it was the last person she wanted to see. You're still here. Lady Seraphine appeared in the hallway outside Seren's room 3 days after her meeting with Kael. She wore a dress of blood-red silk, her hair piled high on her head, her expression one of cool disdain. I thought you'd have the sense to run by now. Seren straightened her spine. I'm under the Alpha's protection. For now. Seraphine smiled, sharp and predatory. But protection is a fragile thing, especially when it comes from someone as changeable as Kyle Thornridge. He's not changeable, Seren said before she could stop herself. He's... What? Honorable? Just... Seraphine laughed. You really don't know him at all, do you? She stepped closer, her voice dropping. Let me tell you something about the Alpha King. He's brilliant, powerful, and utterly ruthless when it comes to protecting his territory. He'll do whatever it takes to maintain control. And right now, you're a liability. He said he'd protect you. I know. Seraphine's smile widened. But how long do you think that will last? A week? A month? Eventually he'll realize you're more trouble than you're worth. And when that happens, she leaned in close, her breath warm against Serene's ear. I'll be waiting. Serene's hands clenched into fists. Why do you hate me so much? I didn't ask for any of this. Because you're in my way. Seraphine pulled back, her expression cold. I was supposed to be his queen, his equal, and now I'm just another political pawn he's keeping at arm's length because he can't figure out what to do with some human servant girl who smells interesting. She adjusted her dress, smoothing imaginary wrinkles. But don't worry, this will all be over soon. What's that supposed to mean? Seraphine just smiled and walked away, leaving Seren standing in the hallway with ice in her veins and the terrible certainty that something bad was coming. She just didn't know what. The answer came 2 nights later. Seren was in her room, trying to read a book she'd borrowed from the castle library, when she heard shouting outside. She went to the window and looked down at the courtyard. Chaos. Wolves were gathered in the training yard, their voices raised in anger. She saw Kael at the center of them, his posture rigid, his expression carved from stone. And across from him stood a man Seren didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that glowed amber in the torchlight. You shame us all, the man was shouting. You abandon sacred tradition for a human. You break a political alliance that took years to build. And for what? For some girl you chased through the forest like a common predator. Watch your tone, Corvin. Kael's voice was deadly quiet, but it carried across the courtyard like a whip crack. Corvin, the elder who'd led the ritual. Seren's stomach dropped. I will not watch my tone, Corvin snarled. Not when you're dragging this pack into disgrace. The Southern Territory is withdrawing their alliance. The Eastern packs are questioning your leadership, and all because you can't control your wolf. My wolf is perfectly controlled. Then prove it. Corvin stepped forward, and Seren saw other wolves moving behind him. Not many, maybe a dozen, but enough. Cast her out. Send the human away and restore order. No! The word was absolute, final. Corvin's face twisted with fury. Then you leave us no choice. And suddenly, the dozen wolves behind him shifted. Seren's heart stopped. This wasn't just an argument. This was a challenge. Kael didn't move. Didn't even flinch. He just stood there, watching as the wolves circled him, their growls filling the night air. You're making a mistake, Kael said quietly. The only mistake was letting you rule for this long. Corvin shifted as well, his wolf form massive and silver-furred. I invoke the right of challenge, Kael Thornridge, for the leadership of this pack. Time seemed to stop, and then Kael smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Seren had ever seen. A smile with no warmth, no humor, just cold, brutal acknowledgement. Accepted. What happened next was carnage. Kael shifted in one fluid motion, his black wolf form exploding from his human shape with barely a sound. And then he moved. Seren had seen fights before, bar brawls, training yard scuffles, nothing serious. This wasn't a fight. This was execution. Kael tore through the challengers like they were made of paper. He was faster, stronger, more brutal than any of them. Wolves went down screaming, their blood dark on the cobblestones. Corvin tried to rally them, tried to coordinate an attack, but it didn't matter. Kael was unstoppable. Within minutes, it was over. Bodies littered the courtyard, some dead, others broken and whimpering. Corvin lay at Kael's feet, his throat beneath Kael's jaws, his eyes wide with the sudden understanding that he'd made a fatal miscalculation. Kael could have killed him, should have, according to tradition. Instead, he shifted back to human form, standing over Corvin's broken wolf body, blood dripping from his hands. Get out, Kael said, his voice flat. Take your supporters and leave this territory. If I see any of you again, I won't be merciful. Corvin shifted back, gasping, clutching his ribs. You're weak, he spat. You'll destroy this pack for her. Maybe. Kael's eyes were cold. But it's my pack to destroy. and then he turned and walked away, leaving Corvin and his broken followers to limp into the darkness. Seren pulled back from the window, her whole body shaking. She sank onto the edge of her bed, her mind reeling. Kael had just faced down a dozen wolves, had won, had spared their lives when he could have ended them, all because of her. The door to her room slammed open. Seren jumped, her heart in her throat. Kael stood in the doorway, still covered in blood, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, barely human. No, I'm fine, He crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her shoulders, his hands surprisingly gentle despite the violence still thrumming through him. "Did anyone come here? Did anyone try to—" "No one came." Seren's voice shook. "Kael, what just happened?" "A challenge." He released her, stepped back, running his bloodied hands through his hair. "Corvin thought he could use you as leverage, thought the pack would support him if he framed this as a choice between tradition and chaos. And? He was wrong." Kael's jaw tightened. "I won't let anyone use you as a pawn. But you just—" Seren's voice broke. "You just fought a dozen wolves. Because of me." "Yes? People died tonight because I was stupid enough to sneak into that ritual. People died tonight because they challenged me." Kael's eyes burned into hers. "That's not on you." "How can you say that?" Seren stood, ignoring the pain in her ankle. "How can you stand there covered in blood and tell me this isn't my fault?" "Because it's not." Kael moved closer, and Seren found herself backed against the wall. "I made a choice that night, to chase you, to spare you, to protect you. Those were my choices, and I'll deal with the consequences." "But why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Kael was silent for a long moment, and then he raised his hand, brushing his knuckles against her cheek. The touch was feather light, hesitant, so at odds with the violence she'd just witnessed. "Because when I close my eyes," he said quietly, "all I see is you running through that forest. All I hear is your heartbeat. All I want—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I don't have words for what this is, but I can't let you go." Seren's breath caught. "That's not fair." "No." A bitter smile crossed his face. "It's not." He pulled away, heading for the door. Seren watched him go, her mind spinning, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Kael." He stopped, looked back. "The challenge tonight. It won't be the last, will it?" His silence was answer enough. "Then let me leave," Seren said desperately. "Before more people die. Before this destroys everything you've built." Kael's expression hardened. "No. You can't just— I'm the Alpha King. I can do whatever I want." He paused at the door. "And what I want is for you to stay alive, even if it costs me everything." And then he was gone, leaving Seren alone with the weight of his words and the terrible knowledge that she was the center of a storm that was only going to get worse. Outside her window, she heard wolves howling in the distance, a sound of warning, of promise. The hunt wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The wolves didn't stop howling until dawn. Seren spent the night curled in her bed, listening to the distant sounds echoing through the forest, territorial calls, warnings, challenges. The castle felt different now, heavier. Like the stone walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next disaster. She didn't sleep, couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw blood on cobblestones, saw Kael standing over broken bodies, heard him saying, "What I want is for you to stay alive, even if it costs me everything," as if she were worth that price, as if anyone could be. When morning finally came, pale and gray through her window, Serene dragged herself out of bed. Her ankle was better, still tender, but functional. The healer had done good work. She dressed in the simple gray dress they'd given her, braided her hair with shaking fingers, and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. Stay in her room like a prisoner, pretend everything was normal, throw herself off the castle walls and save everyone the trouble? The last option was starting to look appealing. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a young servant girl, couldn't be more than 16, with wide brown eyes and hands that twisted nervously in her apron. "Miss Vale?" The girl's voice was barely above a whisper. Lady Seraphine requests your presence in the South Garden. Seren's stomach dropped. Now? Yes, miss. She said it was urgent. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but refusing a direct request from someone like Seraphine would only make things worse. And maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to end this nightmare before more people got hurt. All right, Seren said quietly. Lead the way. The South Garden was a deceptive place, beautiful in a cold, calculated way, with sculpted hedges and stone paths and flowers that bloomed even in the early chill. It was designed to impress, to show power through control of nature itself. Lady Seraphine stood at the center of the garden, surrounded by 3 other noble women Seren didn't recognize. They all wore fine dresses in jewel tones, emerald, sapphire, ruby, their hair arranged in elaborate styles, their expressions matching masks of polite disdain. Seren felt painfully out of place in her plain gray dress and simple braid. Ah, there you are. Seraphine's smile was sharp. We were beginning to think you'd lost your nerve. What do you want? Seren asked, too tired for games. One of the other women gasped at her bluntness. Seraphine just laughed. Straight to the point. I can appreciate that. She gestured to the women around her. These are my associates. Lady Miriam of the Eastern Territory, Lady Elaine from the Western Reach, and Lady Helena, whose father controls the trade routes through the mountains. She paused. We represent a significant portion of the political power in the northern frontier. Congratulations, Seren said flatly. Seraphine's smile thinned. We're here to make you an offer. I'm listening. Leave. Tonight. Before the next moon rises. Seraphine's voice was cool, businesslike. We'll provide you with money, supplies, safe passage to whichever border you choose. Start a new life somewhere far from here. It was exactly what Seren had been thinking about all night. Escape, freedom, a chance to disappear before anyone else died because of her. And if I refuse, then we'll make sure you leave anyway. This came from Lady Miriam, a thin woman with silver blonde hair and ice blue eyes. One way or another. Seren's hands clenched at her sides. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Lady Helena stepped forward. She was older than the others, maybe 40, with hard eyes and a harder voice. You're not one of us. You'll never be one of us. And every day you stay here, you weaken the Alpha's position and endanger the stability of the entire region. I don't want to be here, Seren shot back. You think I asked for any of this? It doesn't matter what you asked for. Seraphine's voice cut through the tension like a knife. What matters is what you're costing us. Cale Thornridge was the strongest Alpha we've had in generations. Ruthless, focused, unshakable. And now he's fighting his own wolves over a servant girl who shouldn't even be breathing his air. She moved closer, her green eyes boring into Seren's. You're poison. And if you cared about him at all, you'd remove yourself before you destroy everything he's built. The words hit harder than Seren wanted to admit. Because they were true, weren't they? People had already died. Political alliances were crumbling. The pack was fracturing, all because Kael couldn't let her go. How much time do I have to decide? Seren asked quietly. Seraphine studied her for a long moment. Until sunset. After that, we take matters into our own hands. Understood. Seren turned to leave, but Seraphine's voice stopped her. One more thing. Don't go crying to the Alpha about this conversation. If you tell him, we'll deny everything, and then we'll make sure you leave in pieces instead of whole. Seren didn't respond. She just walked away, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had until sunset to make a choice that would change everything. She spent the day wandering the castle like a ghost, trying to think. The servants avoided her. The guards watched her with expressions that ranged from pity to contempt. No one spoke to her. She was completely alone. By late afternoon, Seren found herself in the castle library, a massive room lined with books from floor to ceiling, most of them old enough to crumble if touched. It was empty, thank God. She sank into a chair by the window and stared out at the forest beyond the walls. She could run, take Seraphine's offer and disappear, find some village at the edge of the frontier where no one knew her name or her face, work in another kitchen, scrub other floors, live another invisible life. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But something in her chest twisted at the thought. Because running meant leaving Kael to deal with the wreckage alone, meant letting Seraphine and her cronies win, meant proving every single person in this castle right, that she was nothing, that she didn't belong, that she wasn't worth the trouble. You look like someone trying to decide between jumping off a cliff or setting themselves on fire. Seren's head snapped up. A man stood in the doorway, older, maybe 50, with gray hair and kind eyes. He wore simple clothes, not quite servant, but not noble either, something in between. "Sorry," he said, raising his hands. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm Marcus. I manage the library." "Seren, I know who you are." He moved into the room, his movement slow and unthreatening. "Everyone knows who you are. You're the girl who broke the world." Seren's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to." "Most people who break the world don't." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Mind if I ask what you're doing in here?" Most people don't come to the library when they're contemplating life-changing decisions. They go to bars or cliffs or other people's beds. Despite everything, Seren felt a ghost of a smile. "I don't drink. I'm too scared to jump. And I definitely don't have anyone's bed to go to." "Fair enough." Marcus leaned back. "So what's the decision?" Seren hesitated, but what did it matter? This man was a stranger, and she desperately needed to talk to someone who wasn't trying to kill her or claim her. "Stay or go," she said quietly. "Those are my options." "Ah," Marcus nodded slowly. "And if you stay, people keep dying. The pack keeps fracturing, and eventually Kael loses everything because he's too stubborn to let me go. And if you leave, maybe things go back to normal. Maybe the pack stabilizes. Maybe Kael can rebuild what I've destroyed." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you a story?" Seren shrugged. "I've got until sunset." "I've worked in this castle for 30 years, Marcus began. Served under 3 different alphas. The first was weak, tried to rule through compromise and consensus. He lasted 5 years before someone challenged him and tore his throat out. The second was cruel, ruled through fear and violence. He lasted 10 years before his own guards poisoned him. And Kael? Kael is different." Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. "He's brutal when he needs to be, but never wasteful. Strategic, controlled. In 6 years, he's turned this territory from a chaotic mess into the most stable region in the north." He paused. "And in all that time, I've never seen him lose control. Not once. Until me. Until you." Marcus met her eyes. "Which means something about you matters. Something beyond what anyone here understands." "I'm just a servant," Seren whispered. "There's nothing special about me." "If that were true, the Alpha King wouldn't have abandoned a sacred ritual to chase you through the forest." Marcus leaned forward. "Look, I don't know what's happening between you two. Maybe it's fate. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's just 2 broken people recognizing something in each other." He shrugged. "But here's what I do know. Running away won't fix this. It'll just leave the question unanswered, and unanswered questions have a way of festering. So you think I should stay?" "I think you should do whatever lets you look at yourself in a mirror a year from now without wanting to break it." Marcus stood, brushing off his pants. "But for what it's worth, the Alpha King has made his choice. The only person who hasn't is you." He left Seren alone with those words echoing in her head. Sunset came too quickly. Seren stood at her window, watching the sky turn gold and red and purple, her packed bag sitting on the bed behind her. It wasn't much. The clothes they'd given her, a little food she'd saved from breakfast, a knife she'd stolen from the kitchen. Nothing that would get her far, but enough to start. She'd made her decision. She was leaving. Not because Seraphine had threatened her, not because staying was dangerous, but because Marcus had been right. She couldn't look at herself if she let more people die just so she could stay close to someone who barely knew her. Kael would be fine. He'd ruled for 6 years without her. He'd rule for 60 more once she was gone. The knock at her door was quiet, polite. Serene opened it, expecting Seraphine or one of her cronies. Instead, she found Kael. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, tension in his jaw, his clothes rumpled like he hadn't changed them all day. but his eyes were sharp, alert, and they locked onto her bag immediately. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Seren's throat closed up. "Yes." "When?" "Now, before—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter. I'm leaving." Kale stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Did someone threaten you?" "No." "Seren." His voice was low, dangerous. "Did someone threaten you?" She could lie, should lie, but something about the way he was looking at her made the truth spill out. "Seraphine gave me a choice," she said quietly. "Leave willingly or leave in pieces. I chose the first option." The temperature in the room dropped. Kale's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold and deadly. "See, it's not just her," Seren continued, the words tumbling out now. "It's everyone. The servants hate me. The nobles want me gone. Your own wolves are challenging you because of me." She took a shaky breath. "I'm poison, Kale. The longer I stay, the more damage I do." "So you're running." "I'm saving your pack." "Bullshit." The word cracked through the room like a whip. Kale crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. Not rough, but firm enough that she couldn't pull away. "You're scared, and you're letting that fear convince you that leaving is noble instead of what it actually is, cowardice." Seren flinched. "That's not fair." "No?" Kale's jaw tightened. "Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you're not running because you're terrified of what's happening between us." "There's nothing happening between us." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You barely know me. I barely know you. This whole thing is just your wolf being confused, or my wolf isn't confused." Kale released her, stepped back. "But you're right about one thing. I don't know you. Not yet." His eyes burned into hers. "But I want to. And if you leave now, neither of us will ever know what this could have been." "People are dying. People die every day in the frontier. That's not new." Kyle ran a hand through his hair. "What's new is someone making me feel something other than cold calculation. What's new is me wanting to know what you're thinking, what you're afraid of, what makes you laugh." He paused. "What's new is me standing here begging you not to go." Seren's breath caught. "You don't beg." "Apparently I do now." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Turns out you break a lot of my rules." "This won't work," Seren whispered. "You know it won't. I'm human. You're the Alpha King. There's no world where this ends well." "Then we'll create a new world." The certainty in his voice made something in her chest ache, but Seraphine's words echoed in her head. "You're poison. You're destroying him. You're costing him everything." "I can't stay," she said, hating how her voice shook. "I won't watch more people die because of me." Kyle stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right." Seren blinked. "What?" "If you're determined to leave, I won't stop you." His expression was unreadable. "But you're not leaving tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll have an escort take you wherever you want to go. Food, money, protection, until you reach your destination." "Why would you—" "Because I won't have you dying in the wilderness alone." Kyle moved to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "One night, that's all I'm asking. Tomorrow morning, if you still want to go, I'll let you." And then he was gone before Seren could respond. She stood in the empty room, her packed bag mocking her from the bed, and wondered what the hell just happened. Sleep didn't come. Seren lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. Kyle had looked defeated. Not angry, not commanding, just tired and sad and resigned. She'd never seen him like that. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep. She threw on a shawl and limped out into the hallway, thinking maybe she'd go to the library, find something to read, anything to quiet her racing thoughts. But as she passed the window overlooking the courtyard, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Seraphine stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by at least 20 wolves, and they weren't pack wolves. Seren could tell by their bearing, their scars, the way they moved. These were mercenaries, hired killers, and they were all looking up at the castle, at her window. Seren stumbled back, her heart hammering. Seraphine had said sunset, said she'd give Seren until sunset to decide. But it was midnight now. and Seraphine had clearly decided to take matters into her own hands. Seren ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to find Kael, needed to warn him, needed to... A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Seren tried to scream, tried to fight, but whoever had grabbed her was strong, too strong. She was dragged backward into a side corridor, the hand tight over her mouth, another arm wrapped around her waist. Quiet. The voice was female, harsh. If you make a sound, you're dead. Seren went still. The hand released her mouth and she spun to face her attacker. It was Lady Miriam, the silver blonde woman from the garden, and she looked furious. What? Seren started. Shut up and listen. Miriam glanced down the corridor, then back. Seraphine lied to you. She was never going to let you leave alive. Those wolves out there? They're here to kill you and make it look like an accident. Or better yet, make it look like the Alpha did it in a fit of rage. Seren's mind reeled. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm not a murderer. Miriam's jaw tightened. I wanted you gone, yes. But dead? That's too far. Even for her. She grabbed Seren's arm. There's a servant's passage 3 doors down. It leads to the eastern stables. Take a horse and ride as far and fast as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back. But Kael is about to walk into a trap. Miriam's eyes were hard. Seraphine sent word that you were trying to escape. He's on his way to your room right now. When he finds it empty, he'll go looking for you. And when he does, those mercenary wolves will be waiting. Horror crashed through Seren. She's going to kill him. She's going to try. And with 20 mercenaries against 1 wolf, even the Alpha King won't survive. Miriam shoved her toward the corridor. So run. Run now, and maybe he'll see reason and let you go instead of dying for someone he barely knows. Every instinct screamed at Seren to do exactly that. To run. To survive. But her feet wouldn't move. Because Marcus had been right, running wouldn't fix this. It would just leave questions unanswered. And Kael would die thinking she'd abandoned him, that she hadn't cared enough to stay. No, Seren said quietly. Miriam's eyes widened. What? I'm not running. Seren pulled free from her grip. Where's the Alpha's armory? Are you insane? You can't... Where is it? Something in Seren's expression must have convinced her. Miriam stared for a moment, then sighed. 2 floors down, West Wing, but you can't fight them. You're not even a wolf. I know, Seren was already moving, but maybe I don't have to be. She ran through the castle, her ankle screaming in protest, her lungs burning. She found the armory, a massive room lined with weapons of every kind. She grabbed a crossbow, a quiver of bolts, and a hunting knife. Not enough to fight 20 wolves, but maybe enough to buy time. She ran back up the stairs, her mind racing. If she could get to the courtyard first, if she could warn Kael before he walked into the trap, she burst through the main doors and skidded to a halt. Too late. Kael stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by Seraphine's mercenary wolves. They'd already shifted, massive, snarling beasts circling him like sharks. And Seraphine stood at the edge, watching with cold satisfaction. Looking for someone? Seraphine called out to Kael. I'm afraid your little pet has flown the coop. Took off about an hour ago. Such a shame. I suppose she didn't care about you as much as you thought. Kael's expression was stone. Call off your dog, Seraphine. I don't think so. She smiled. You've become a liability, Kael Thornridge. Weak, distracted, unfit to rule. These wolves here? They agree with me. And once you're gone, we can restore proper order to this territory. You really think you can kill me? Kael's voice was deadly quiet. I think 20 against 1 are decent odds. And then Seren's voice cut through the night like a blade. Make it 20 against 2. Every head turned. Seren stood at the top of the steps, crossbow raised, aimed directly at Seraphine's chest. Kael's eyes went wide. Seren, what are you... Shut up. Seren's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. She descended the steps, keeping the crossbow trained on Seraphine. I'm not running. Not tonight. Not ever. You stupid girl, Seraphine hissed. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Yeah. Seren reached the courtyard, moving to stand beside Kael. I just chose a side. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed, And then Seraphine smiled. Kill them both. The wolves lunged. What happened next was chaos. Kale shifted instantly, his massive black wolf form exploding into motion. He tore into the mercenaries with brutal efficiency, teeth and claws ripping through fur and flesh. But 20 was too many, even for him. Saren fired the crossbow. The bolt caught one wolf in the shoulder, sending it sprawling. She reloaded, fired again. Another hit. But they were closing in, snarling, bloodthirsty. One lunged for her throat. Kale intercepted it mid-leap, jaws clamping around its neck with a sickening crunch. But that left his back exposed. Another wolf dove in, claws raking across his flank. Blood sprayed across the cobblestones. Saren screamed. She threw herself at the attacking wolf, driving her knife into its ribs with all her strength. It yelped and twisted, knocking her to the ground. Pain exploded through her already injured ankle. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The wolf loomed over her, teeth bared, ready to tear out her throat. And then something impossible happened. Heat erupted through Saren's body, searing, agonizing, like her bones were breaking and reforming all at once. She tried to scream, but the sound that came out was a howl. The wolf above her froze. Because Saren was shifting, her body convulsed, bones cracking, muscles tearing and rebuilding. Fur erupted across her skin. Her hands became paws. Her senses exploded. Suddenly she could smell everything, hear everything, see in ways she never had before. And when the transformation was complete, Saren stood on 4 legs, her wolf form smaller than Kael's, but no less deadly. She was a wolf. She'd always been a wolf. The courtyard went silent. Even the fighting stopped as every wolf stared at her in shock. And then Kael's voice filled her mind. Not words, but feelings. Recognition. Understanding. Triumph. Finally. Saren didn't have time to process what was happening. The mercenary wolf lunged at her again, and instinct took over. She met it mid-leap, teeth finding throat, tearing, ripping. It went down. And suddenly the tide turned. Kael and Saren fought together, moving like they'd been doing it for years instead of seconds. They were brutal, efficient, unstoppable. One by one, the mercenary wolves fell. Some fled. Some died. Within minutes, it was over. Seraphine stood alone at the edge of the courtyard, her face pale with shock and fury. Kyle shifted back to human form, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. Saren tried to shift too, felt her body resisting, finally forced it to obey. She collapsed on the cobblestones, naked and shaking and confused. Kyle was beside her instantly, wrapping her in his cloak, his hands surprisingly gentle despite the violence still humming through him. "You shifted," he said, his voice rough with awe. "I don't understand," Saren whispered. "How? You're not human." Kale's eyes burned into hers. "You never were. You're dormant, a wolf who never awakened." He pulled her closer. "Until tonight." "But that's impossible. Nothing about us is impossible." He looked up at Seraphine, his expression going cold. "Leave. Now, before I change my mind about letting you live." Seraphine opened her mouth to protest, saw the death in Kael's eyes, and ran. Saren watched her disappear into the darkness, her mind still reeling. She'd shifted. She was a wolf. Everything she'd believed about herself was a lie. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Kael looked down at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something soft in his expression, something almost tender. "Now?" He helped her to her feet, steadied her when she swayed. "Now we figure out what the hell we are to each other." Saren laughed, the sound half hysterical. "That's your plan?" "That's my plan." And as the first light of dawn broke over the castle walls, Saren realized something terrifying. She wasn't leaving. She was staying. And the real fight was only just beginning. The castle exploded into chaos before the sun fully rose. News of the courtyard battle spread through the territory like wildfire. Servants whispered it in hallways. Guards muttered it during shift changes. And by mid-morning, riders were already departing to carry word to the outer territories. The Alpha King had fought off an assassination attempt. Lady Seraphine had fled. And the human servant girl everyone had been talking about? She wasn't human at all. Saren sat in Kael's private chambers, wrapped in blankets that smelled like him, leather and pine, and something wild she couldn't name. Her body ached everywhere, The shift had torn through her like a storm, and now every muscle felt bruised, every bone fragile. The healer had examined her twice already, prodding and poking while muttering things Seren didn't understand. Dormant bloodline, the healer had said, shaking her head. I've only read about these in old texts. Never thought I'd see one awaken. She'd looked at Seren with something between awe and suspicion. Your wolf was buried deep. Something powerful had to trigger it. Seren knew what that something was. Or rather, who. Kale stood by the window now, dressed in fresh clothes but still carrying the tension of the fight in his shoulders. He'd refused treatment for his wounds, said they'd heal on their own, the way wolf injuries always did. But Seren could see the way he favored his left side, the way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking. He'd taken a lot of damage protecting her. You should rest, Seren said quietly. So should you. Kael didn't turn from the window. But neither of us will. What happens now? That made him turn. His eyes found hers, pale gray and intense. Now we deal with the fallout. The Southern Territory will demand answers. The Eastern and Western Territories will want to know where their representatives stand. And every wolf in this castle will be wondering what the hell you are and what I'm going to do about it. What are you going to do about it? Kael crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could see the dried blood still caked in his hair. I'm going to claim you, he said simply. Officially, in front of the entire pack. No more hiding, no more questions. Seren's breath caught. That's insane. Probably. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But I'm done pretending this isn't what it is. You're my mate, Seren. My wolf knew it the moment I caught your scent. And now that your wolf has awakened, he reached out, brushing his thumb across her cheek. There's no going back. The pack won't accept it. I'm nobody. I was a servant 3 weeks ago. You were never a servant. Kael's voice was firm. You were a dormant wolf trapped in circumstances you didn't understand. That changes everything. Does it? Seren pulled back slightly. Because I'm still the same person who scrubbed floors and hauled water. Still the same girl who made a stupid bet and broke into a sacred ritual. A wolf bloodline doesn't erase that. No. Kael stood, his expression hardening. But it does give you standing, protection, a place in the hierarchy that no one can dispute. He moved back to the window. I'm calling a council meeting, today. Every ranking wolf in the territory will attend. And I'm going to make it very clear that you're under my protection, and anyone who challenges that answers to me. They'll fight you. Let them try. The words were cold, absolute. I'm tired of people thinking they can dictate who I choose, who I protect, who I... He stopped, his jaw working. The pack needs to remember who the alpha is. And if that means breaking a few more bones, so be it. Seren wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was too much, too fast, too dangerous. But the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about power, about control, about an alpha who'd been challenged one too many times and was done playing nice. When's the meeting? She asked instead. 2 hours. Kael glanced back at her. Can you stand? Seren tested her legs. They shook, but held. I can manage. Good. Because you're going to need to. He paused. What happened last night, the shift, the fight, it's going to raise questions, dangerous ones, about where you came from, who your parents were, why your bloodline was dormant. I don't know the answers to any of that. Then we'll find them. Kael's voice softened slightly. But first, we survived the council. A knock at the door interrupted them. Kael called out, Enter. Marcus stepped inside, the librarian from before looking worried. Alpha, the council members are gathering. Word spread faster than expected. Representatives from the Southern Territory are already here demanding an audience. Let them demand. Kael's expression was carved from stone. They'll get their audience at the council meeting, not before. Marcus nodded, then glanced at Seren. Miss Vale, there's someone here asking to see you. Seren blinked. Me? Says she's your friend, kitchen girl named Mira. The name hit Seren like a punch. Mira. The one who dared her to sneak into the ritual. The one who'd started all of this. I don't want to see her, Seren said flatly. She's insistent. Says she has information you need to hear. Kael looked at Seren, raising an eyebrow. Your call. Seren wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Marcus to throw Mira out on her ass and be done with it. But something in the librarian's tone made her hesitate. Fine, she said finally. 5 minutes. That's it. Marcus nodded and left. Moments later, Mira appeared in the doorway. She looked terrible. Her hair was a mess, her dress wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. When she saw Seren, something between relief and guilt crossed her face. Seren, she breathed, I heard what happened. You've got 5 minutes, Seren cut her off. Talk. Mira flinched at the coldness in her voice. I know you hate me. I know I'm the reason all of this started, but I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago. I'm listening. Mira glanced at Kael nervously. It's about your parents. Seren went very still. What about them? They weren't human either. Mira's voice shook. Your mother, I knew her before you came to the castle. She worked in the outer villages, kept her head down, never told anyone what she was. But I saw her shift once, accidentally. She made me swear never to tell. The room tilted. Seren gripped the arm of her chair. You're lying. I'm not. Mira took a step forward. Your mother was a wolf, but she was running from something, someone. She never said what, just that she had to hide, had to keep you hidden. Tears spilled down her cheeks. When she died, I promised I'd keep your secret, watch over you, make sure no one looked too closely. Then why the hell did you dare me to sneak into the ritual? Seren's voice cracked. Why would you risk exposing me? Because I thought, Mira's voice broke. I thought if the Alpha saw you, if your wolf woke up, maybe you'd finally be safe. Maybe you'd have the protection your mother never did. She wiped at her eyes. I didn't know it would cause all this. I just wanted to help. Seren stared at her, rage and confusion warring in her chest. Get out. Seren, please. I said get out. The words came out as half a snarl, and Seren felt her wolf stirring beneath her skin, restless and angry. You don't get to decide what's best for me. You don't get to manipulate my life and call it help. Mira backed toward the door, tears streaming freely now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And then she was gone. Seren sat there shaking, her mind reeling. Her mother had been a wolf, had been running from something, had hidden Seren's bloodline so deep it took a bond with an Alpha King to wake it. Who was she running from? Seren whispered. Kael moved beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. We'll find out, I promise. What if it's something bad? What if my mother did something terrible and that's why? Then we deal with it. Kael's grip tightened slightly. Together. The word settled something in Seren's chest. Together. Not alone. Not abandoned. Together. She took a shaky breath. The council meeting. How bad is it going to be? Honestly, Kael's smile was grim. Probably the worst 2 hours of your life. Great. Seren stood, testing her legs again. Let's get it over with. The council chamber was packed. Seren had never been in this room before. It was reserved for high-ranking wolves only, a massive space with stone walls and a vaulted ceiling. Torches lined the walls, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled wolves. There had to be at least 50 of them, all dressed in formal attire, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Kael led her to the front of the room, where 2 chairs sat on a raised platform. He took one, gestured for her to take the other. Seren hesitated. That chair was meant for his equal, his mate, his queen. Sit, Kael said quietly. That's an order. Seren sat. The room erupted in whispers. She heard fragments. Servant girl, dormant bloodline, disrespect, tradition. Every eye in the room was on her, judging, measuring, finding her wanting. Kael stood, and the whispers died immediately. You all know why we're here, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber. 2 nights ago, Lady Seraphine attempted to have me assassinated. She hired mercenary wolves and planned to frame my death as an accident or my own doing. She failed. And in the process, something extraordinary happened. He gestured to Seren. Seren Vale, who many of you knew as a servant, revealed her true nature. She is a wolf, a dormant bloodline that awakened in defense of this pack. In defense of me. She's nobody, someone shouted from the back. She has no lineage, no standing. She has my protection, Kael cut him off, his voice like iron, and she has awakened as my mate. That gives her more standing than any lineage ever could. The room exploded. Wolves were on their feet, shouting, arguing. Seren saw faces contorted with rage, with disbelief. She wanted to sink into her chair and disappear. But Kael remained standing, calm, waiting for the chaos to die down. Finally, an older wolf stepped forward, tall, gray-haired, with ceremonial markings on his face. Alpha Thornridge, I am Elder Varys from the Southern Territory. I speak for Lord Morgrave when I say this is unacceptable. You were betrothed to Lady Seraphine. That alliance is void, Kael said flatly. Seraphine tried to kill me. That nullifies any agreement. Then choose another from the southern houses. Varys' voice rose. Maintain the alliance. Maintain stability. Don't throw everything away for some girl with a questionable past and no proven loyalty. Her loyalty was proven when she stood beside me against 20 mercenary wolves. Kael's eyes were cold. Where were the southern houses then? Where were you? Varys' face reddened. We were not informed because Seraphine acted alone, treasonously. Kael took a step forward. Let me be very clear. I will not be dictated to about who I choose. Not by the Southern Territory. Not by this council. Not by anyone. He paused. Seren Vale is my mate. That is final. Anyone who challenges that challenges me directly. The silence was deafening, and then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. What proof do we have that she's truly your mate? That this isn't some infatuation? Kael's jaw tightened. The bond is recognized by both our wolves. That's all the proof needed. Not according to tradition. Another voice, this one female. Lady Helena stepped forward, her expression cold. Tradition states that a mate bond must be verified by the elders, through the ancient ritual of recognition. Seren's stomach dropped. She'd heard of that ritual. It was intimate, invasive, designed to prove beyond doubt that two wolves were truly bonded. It required both parties to shift, to allow the elders to examine their connection at its most primal level. Fine, Kael said, his voice hard. We'll do the ritual. Tonight. Kael, Seren whispered. You can't. I barely know how to shift. I don't. Trust me. He looked down at her, his eyes softening slightly. I won't let them hurt you. Elder Varys nodded slowly. Very well. The ritual will take place at sunset. If the bond is genuine, the council will recognize it. If not, he let the threat hang in the air. It's genuine, Kael said flatly, but you'll see for yourselves soon enough. The meeting continued for another hour. Debates about territory lines, trade agreements, security measures in the wake of Seraphine's betrayal. Seren stopped listening. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what she'd just agreed to. A ritual. In front of all these wolves, where they'd examine her bond with Kael, like she was some curiosity to be studied. By the time the council finally dispersed, Seren felt like she was going to throw up. Kael led her out of the chamber through corridors that felt too narrow, too suffocating. They ended up in a small courtyard garden, empty and quiet. I'm sorry, Kael said immediately. I should have prepared you for that. Should have. It's fine. Seren's voice was hollow. You did what you had to. No, it's not fine. Kael turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. They want to humiliate you, want to prove you're not worthy. But I won't let them. How are you going to stop them? It's tradition. If we refuse, they'll never accept the bond. Then we make damn sure the ritual proves them all wrong. Kael's eyes burned into hers. Your wolf is strong, Seren. I felt it during the fight, felt how it responded to mine. The bond is real. All we have to do is show them. I don't know if I can. The admission felt like failure. I shifted once, by accident, in the middle of a fight. I don't even know how I did it. Then I'll teach you. Kale's voice softened. We have until sunset. That's enough time. It wasn't enough time. Seren knew that. But she also knew she didn't have a choice. Okay, she said quietly. Teach me. What? The next 6 hours were brutal. Kyle took her to a private training ground deep in the forest, far from the castle and prying eyes. The space was a clearing surrounded by ancient trees, the ground worn smooth from centuries of use. Shifting isn't just physical, Kyle explained, pacing around her. It's mental, emotional. You have to let your wolf take control while still maintaining your sense of self. It's a balance. That sounds impossible. It's not. You've already done it once. He stopped in front of her. What do you remember from the courtyard? What triggered the shift? Seren thought back. Fear, rage. I saw that wolf about to kill me and I just snapped. I wanted to fight back. Wanted to survive. Good. That's instinct. Your wolf responding to danger. Kyle nodded. Now you need to learn to call it without the danger. Without the fear. How? Close your eyes. Seren obeyed, feeling ridiculous. Feel your heartbeat, Kale continued. Feel the blood moving through your veins. Now sink deeper, past the human part of you, down to where your wolf lives. Seren tried. She really did, but all she felt was tired, sore, and increasingly frustrated. I don't feel anything. You're not trying hard enough. I am trying. She opened her eyes, glaring at him. Maybe I was just a fluke. Maybe I'm not really... Kyle moved fast. 1 second he was standing 10 feet away. The next he was right in front of her, his hand around her throat. Not squeezing, just holding, just threatening. Seren's wolf erupted. She felt it surge through her like lightning, felt her body beginning to shift, and then Kyle released her, stepping back. There, he said calmly. That's your wolf. Now do it again, without me provoking you. It took another 2 hours of failures, false starts, and mounting panic before Seren managed a partial shift, just her hands turning to paws, claws extending. But it was progress. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Seren could shift completely. It wasn't smooth, wasn't easy, but she could do it. That'll have to be enough, Kyle said, studying her wolf form critically. You're smaller than most, but that's not necessarily a weakness. You're fast, agile. Use that. Seren shifted back, gasping. Her whole body ached. What happens during the ritual exactly? Kale's expression grew serious. We'll both shift. The elders will examine our wolves, how we move together, how we respond to each other. They'll be looking for signs of the bond, synchronization, trust, connection. And if they don't see it, they will. Kale moved closer, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. Because it's real, Seren. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I know what I feel when I'm near you, what my wolf feels, and I know you feel it too. She did. That was the terrifying part. She felt the pull between them like a physical thing, drawing her closer even when logic screamed at her to run. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. The confession surprised her. Kyle, the ruthless Alpha King, admitting fear? But we do this together. That's the bond. That's what makes it unbreakable. Together. There was that word again. Seren took a shaky breath. Okay, let's go prove them all wrong. The ritual took place in the same hall where Seren had first seen Kyle, the eastern chamber with its vaulted ceiling and ancient tapestries. But this time, the entire pack was present. Hundreds of wolves lined the walls, their eyes glowing faintly in the torchlight. The elders stood in a circle at the center of the room. Elder Varys led them, his expression stern. Alpha Thornridge, Seren Vale, stepped forward. They did. Seren's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. You claim a mate bond, Varys continued. This ritual will prove or disprove that claim. You will shift. You will demonstrate your connection. And we will judge. He paused. Understand that failure here means the bond is false, and a false bond is grounds for exile. For both of you. Kale's hand found Seren's, squeezed once. Understood. Then begin. Kale shifted first. His transformation was fluid, effortless, One moment a man, the next a massive black wolf that seemed to swallow the light around him. He moved to the center of the circle, his pale eyes finding Seren's. Seren took a breath. Let her wolf rise. Let the shift take her. Pain, heat, bones cracking and reforming. And then she was standing on four legs, her senses exploding with new information. She could smell everything. The smoke from the torches, the musk of hundreds of wolves, the sharp scent of judgment and doubt. And Kael, she could smell him most of all. Pine and leather and something wild that made her wolf hum with recognition. He approached slowly, his movements careful. Serene's instincts screamed at her to run, to submit, to do something, but she held her ground. Kael circled her once, then twice. His wolf was enormous compared to hers, could have snapped her neck with one bite. But there was no threat in his posture. Just curiosity, assessment. And then he did something that made the entire room gasp. He lowered himself, pressed his forehead to hers. The bond exploded between them. It wasn't something Seren could see or touch, but she felt it, a connection snapping into place, solid and unbreakable. She felt Kael's emotions flooding through her, protectiveness, possessiveness, something deeper that she didn't have a name for. And she knew he felt hers too, fear, determination, trust. They moved together then, not coordinated, not planned, just natural, circling, stepping in sync, their bodies responding to each other like they'd done this 1,000 times before. This was the bond. This was what the elders needed to see. And judging by the stunned silence in the room, they saw it. Elder Varys stepped forward after what felt like an eternity. Enough! Kael and Seren shifted back, standing side by side, both breathing hard. Varys looked at the other elders. Silent communication passed between them. Then he turned back to Kael and Seren. The bond is genuine, he said finally. We recognize it as true. The room erupted. Some wolves cheered, others protested, but it didn't matter. The elders had spoken. Kael pulled Seren close, his arm around her waist. It's done, he murmured against her hair. You're mine. Officially. Seren wanted to argue about the possessive phrasing, wanted to point out that she wasn't property to be owned, but the relief flooding through her was too strong. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd won. Elder Varys raised his hand for silence. However, he continued, and Seren's stomach dropped. There remains the matter of political stability. The Southern Territory demands recompense for the broken alliance, and there are still questions about Miss Vale's lineage that must be addressed. What kind of recompense? Kael's voice was hard. That will be determined in further negotiations. Varys's expression was cold. But know this, Alpha Thornridge. The Council recognizes your bond, but we also recognize that your choices have destabilized the region. You will need to work very hard to rebuild that trust. Understood, Varys nodded. The ritual is complete. The bond is recognized. But the consequences, he let the sentence hang. Those are just beginning. As the crowd dispersed, Seren felt the weight of those words settle over her. They'd won the battle, proven the bond, earned recognition, but the war was far from over. And somehow she knew the hardest part was still to come. The hardest part, as it turned out, was the silence. Not the angry kind. Seren had grown used to that. The whispers in hallways, the glares from nobles who thought she didn't belong, the servants who still couldn't meet her eyes. That was background noise now, easy to ignore if she tried hard enough. No, this was different. This was the silence of wolves watching, waiting, measuring her every move to see if she'd crack under the pressure, to see if the servant girl would crumble now that she'd been thrust into a role she had no training for, no preparation for, no right to, according to half the territory anyway. 3 days after the ritual, Seren stood in what was now technically her chambers, a suite of rooms adjacent to Kael's, connected by a door that stayed open more often than not. The space was beautiful in a cold, impersonal way. High vaulted ceilings that made her feel small, stone walls hung with tapestries depicting battles she didn't know, and wolves she'd never heard of. Furniture that looked like it had been carved from single pieces of ancient wood, polished to a shine, beautiful and completely unused. It didn't feel like hers. Nothing in this castle felt like hers except the small wooden trunk at the foot of the massive bed. the one that held her old servant's clothes. She hadn't thrown them away, couldn't bring herself to. They were a reminder of who she'd been 3 weeks ago. Invisible, insignificant, safe in her anonymity, even if that safety had come with a price. Now she was the Alpha King's recognized mate, his equal in the eyes of the pack and the law, and she had absolutely no idea what the hell she was supposed to do with that. A knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. "Come in, come." Marcus entered, carrying a stack of books that looked older than the castle itself, bound in cracked leather and smelling of dust and age. "Thought you might want these," he said, setting them carefully on the writing desk near the window. History of dormant bloodlines, lineage records going back 5 centuries. Anything I could find in the archives that might help answer some of your questions. Seren moved to the desk, running her fingers over the spine of the top book. The leather was so old it felt like it might disintegrate under her touch. "Did you find anything about my mother?" "Not yet." Marcus's expression was apologetic, his kind eyes shadowed with concern. "But these records are extensive. If there's information about your family, about where you came from, it'll be in here somewhere. It's just going to take time to sort through it all." "Thank you, Marcus. Really." Seren meant it. The librarian had been one of the few people in this castle who treated her like a person instead of a problem to be solved or a threat to be eliminated. Marcus hesitated at the door, his hand on the frame. "How are you holding up?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that, not the healers who'd checked her injuries from the courtyard fight. Not the servants who brought her meals and cleaned her rooms in tense silence. Not even Kael, though he watched her constantly with those intense gray eyes, like he was perpetually checking to make sure she was still breathing, still whole, still there. "I don't know," Seren admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "I feel like I'm playing a role I'm not qualified for. Like any minute someone's going to realize I'm just a girl who used to scrub floors and carry water, and this whole thing will collapse around me." "You fought off 20 mercenary wolves," Marcus pointed out gently, shifted for the first time in the middle of a battle and survived. "Stood before the entire council and proved your bond was genuine. I'd say you're qualified for quite a bit more than you give yourself credit for." "I barely remember that fight. It was just instinct and panic and desperation." "That's what survival is." Marcus smiled slightly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Most of life, actually. We're all just figuring it out as we go. Even the ones who look like they have everything under control." He paused. "Give it time. You'll find your footing." After he left, Seren opened the first book, settling into the chair by the window where the morning light was strongest. The text was dense, written in an old dialect that made her head hurt trying to parse the archaic phrasing and unfamiliar terms. But she read anyway, desperate for answers about what she was, where she'd come from, why her mother had hidden so thoroughly that even Seren hadn't known the truth about herself. She was 3 chapters deep into a particularly dry passage about bloodline inheritance patterns when Kael appeared in the doorway. She didn't hear him knock, wasn't sure if he had. The bond between them had grown stronger since the ritual, a constant low-level awareness of each other's presence that was both comforting and deeply unsettling. "You're supposed to be resting," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm fine." "You've barely slept in 3 days." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact delivered in that flat, controlled tone he used when he was trying not to sound concerned. "Neither have you." Seren didn't look up from the book, tracing her finger along a particularly confusing sentence. "I can feel it through the bond. Your exhaustion, your stress, whatever's keeping you up at night." That made him pause. The bond was still new, still strange. They were both learning its contours, its depths, what it meant to be constantly aware of another person's emotional state. Sometimes it was overwhelming. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept Seren grounded. "The Southern Territory is demanding a formal apology," Kael said finally, pushing off the doorframe and moving into the room. "For breaking the alliance with Seraphine, they're calling it a breach of contract and an insult to their house." "Are you going to give it to them?" "Hell no." He sat on the edge of the desk, his arms crossed over his chest. "Seraphine tried to have me assassinated, hired mercenary wolves to kill me and make it look like an accident or a crime of passion. They're lucky I'm not demanding reparations and blood debt from them." "So what happens now?" "Negotiations, posturing. The usual political dance. Kael's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. Eventually they'll realize they have more to lose by staying hostile than by accepting the new reality. But until then, we have to be careful. There are still wolves in this territory who see you as a threat to stability, who think I've gone soft choosing a mate based on a bond instead of political advantage. They're not wrong, though. I am a threat to stability. Seren finally looked up at him, meeting those pale gray eyes. Everything was fine until I showed up. You had your alliances, your political arrangements, your carefully balanced power structure. And then I stumbled into that ritual, and it all fell apart. Yes, they are wrong. Kael's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. You're not the threat. The old system was. A system where political alliances mattered more than genuine bonds, where power was maintained through arranged matches and calculated breeding, treating wolves like chess pieces instead of people. He paused, his expression softening slightly. You disrupted that. And disruption feels dangerous to people who benefit from the status quo. But that doesn't mean the disruption was wrong. Seren studied him for a long moment. You sound like you've been thinking about this a lot. I have been. Kael ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. For years, actually, I've hated the political games, hated being told who I should choose, how I should rule, what alliances I needed to maintain to keep the peace. But I played along because it was easier than fighting the entire system, because it kept the territory stable. His eyes met hers, and there was something raw in them. And then you stumbled into that ritual and everything changed. You gave me an excuse to stop playing the game, to choose what I actually wanted instead of what was expected. I didn't stumble. I snuck in on a stupid dare because I was trying to prove I wasn't scared. Semantics. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Point is, you were there. I caught your scent, and my wolf knew. In that moment, everything I thought I understood about duty and power and political necessity just stopped mattering. And what do you want? The question came out softer than Seren intended, almost vulnerable. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Kael stood, moved closer until he was standing right in front of her chair. He reached out, cupped her face in his hands. His touch was surprisingly gentle for someone capable of such violence. You, he said simply, I want you. Not because my wolf chose you, though it did, and I trust my wolf's instincts more than I trust most people's logic. Not because you're politically useful, though you might be, once people stop being idiots about dormant bloodlines and old magic, but because when I'm with you, I feel something other than cold calculation, something that might actually be worth all this mess we're wading through. Seren's breath caught in her throat. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. The bar was pretty low considering you spent your whole life as a servant with no one paying attention to you. True. Despite everything, the stress, the fear, the uncertainty, Seren found herself smiling. But still, I'll take it. Kael leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers in the gesture their wolves had shared during the ritual. It was becoming their thing, she realized. This moment of connection that didn't require words or explanations. We're going to get through this, he murmured. Together. All the political bullshit, all the wolves who want to challenge us, all the uncertainty about what comes next. We'll handle it. There was that word again. Together. Seren was starting to believe it might actually mean something. The break came 2 days later in the form of a letter that changed everything. Seren was in the library with Marcus, going through more lineage records and trying to make sense of genealogies that branched and twisted like ancient trees when a messenger arrived. The young wolf looked nervous, kept glancing at Seren like she might suddenly shift and attack him. Message for Miss Vale, he said, holding out a sealed envelope with shaking hands. From the Eastern Territory. The courier said it was urgent. Seren took it, frowning at the unfamiliar seal pressed into the wax. A wolf's head surrounded by thorns, rendered in such detail she could see individual teeth in the wolf's snarl. She didn't recognize the symbol, but something about it made her skin prickle with unease. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, the kind that spoke of education and nobility. The letter was short, blunt, and it shattered everything Seren thought she understood about herself. Marcus, Seren said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you know anything about House Thornvale? The librarian went pale. Actually pale, the color draining from his face like someone had opened a tap. Where did you hear that name? This letter. It's from someone claiming to be... She checked again, sure she'd misread, that her eyes were playing tricks. Claiming to be my grandmother, my mother's mother. Marcus sat down heavily in the nearest chair, his legs seeming to give out. Your grandmother. She says my mother was her daughter, that my mother's name was Ilara Thornvale, that she fled House Thornvale 26 years ago after refusing an arranged marriage that would have bound her to an alpha from the Southern Territory, that she's been searching for us ever since. Saren's hands shook slightly, making the paper rattle. She wants to meet me, says she has information I need to hear, about who I am, about why my mother ran, about the people who killed her. House Thornvale is old blood, Marcus said quietly, his voice strained. Very old, very powerful. They controlled the Eastern Territory for generations, going back further than most of the current ruling houses can trace, until they fell out of favor about 30 years ago in some kind of political purge. I thought the line had died out completely, that there were no survivors. Apparently not. Seren read the letter again, her mind racing. She says my mother was supposed to marry an alpha from the Southern Territory to create an alliance between houses. But my mother refused, ran instead, and when she ran, she became a target. Seren's voice caught. She says my mother died protecting me, protecting my secret, making sure no one could find me and use me. Marcus leaned forward, his expression grave. Seren, if this is true, if you're actually descended from House Thornvale, that changes everything. Your bloodline isn't just dormant, it's powerful. Old magic. The kind that terrifies people because it's unpredictable and can't be controlled through normal political channels. Is that why my mother hid? Why she buried my wolf so deep I didn't even know it existed? Probably. Old bloodlines come with old enemies, old debts, old expectations and obligations that don't die just because the house falls. Marcus's expression was troubled. If word gets out that you're Thornvale blood, every territory in the north is going to want a piece of you. Some to use you for political advantage, others to eliminate the threat before you can become powerful enough to challenge them. Seren's stomach churned, nausea rising in her throat. What do I do? Tell Kyle immediately. He needs to know. She found him in his study, poring over maps with two of his senior advisors, both older wolves with scarred faces and hard eyes. They stopped talking the moment she entered, and Seren realized with a cold certainty that they'd been discussing her. Discussing the Seren problem and how to manage the political fallout of the Alpha King's controversial choice. Out, Kyle said to his advisors without taking his eyes off Seren. His tone left no room for argument. They left quickly, nodding respectfully as they passed her. I got a letter, Seren said without preamble, holding it out. You need to read this. Kyle took it, his expression neutral. But as he read, his eyes grew darker, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he set it down on his desk with deliberate care, like it might explode if handled roughly. Thornvale, he said flatly. Not a question. A statement heavy with implications. You know the name. Everyone knows the name. They were legendary before they fell, powerful enough to challenge the ruling houses directly, which is exactly why those houses worked together to destroy them. Kale's jaw tightened further. If you're Thornvale blood, that explains a lot. Why your wolf was dormant. Why your mother went to such extreme lengths to hide. It was probably a protection spell or blood magic, something your mother did to keep you hidden from the people hunting her. The letter says my grandmother wants to meet me, tomorrow, at the neutral grounds between territories. Absolutely not. The words came out sharp, final. Kyle, it's a trap, Seren. It has to be. House Thornvale was obliterated 3 decades ago. Anyone claiming to be your grandmother is either lying outright or has an agenda that ends with you dead or captured. Or she's telling the truth, and this is my only chance to learn about my family, about who I am, where I came from, why my mother had to run and hide and eventually die protecting me. Seren moved closer to his desk, her hands pressed flat against the wood. I need answers. I can't keep living in this fog of not knowing. And I need you alive. Kael's voice was hard, uncompromising. You're the Alpha King's mate now. That makes you a target for anyone who wants to destabilize my rule or gain leverage over the Northern Territory. Going to meet some mysterious stranger claiming to be family is exactly the kind of mistake that gets people killed in the most brutal ways possible. Then come with me. The words tumbled out before Seren could second-guess them. If it's a trap, we'll handle it together. If it's real, then I finally get some answers and maybe I can stop feeling like I'm walking around blind. Either way, I'm not sitting in this castle wondering for the rest of my life what might have been true. Kael stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. It was a small smile, barely a quirk of his lips, but it softened his entire face. You're getting bolder, more confident. I'm getting desperate. There's a difference. Same thing, sometimes. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. We'll go. But we're bringing an escort, 20 wolves, all of them trained fighters. And if anything feels even slightly wrong, if I sense any hint of a trap, we leave immediately. No arguments. Deal. The neutral grounds were exactly what the name implied. Neutral territory. A wide stretch of open grassland between the eastern and northern territories, marked by a circle of ancient standing stones that predated even the oldest wolf packs. The stones were massive, easily 15 feet tall, carved with symbols that no one living could fully translate anymore. It was considered sacred space, where violence was forbidden by laws older than memory, and negotiations could happen under the protection of ancient magic. Kael brought 20 wolves, just as he'd promised. They stayed back about 50 yards, forming a loose perimeter around the standing stones, but their presence was unmistakable, a show of strength and protection. In the center of the stone circle stood a woman. She was old, maybe 70, though it was hard to tell with wolves, who aged differently than humans. Her hair was pure silver, pulled back in a severe braid that fell to her waist. Her face was lined with years and hardship, but her posture was straight, regal even in simple traveling clothes. And her eyes were the same gray as Serene's, the same shape, the same intensity. "Seren Vale," the woman said as they approached, her voice rough like she'd spent years not using it much. "You look like your mother, exactly like her at your age." Seren's throat tightened, emotion threatening to choke her. "Are you really my grandmother?" "I am. My name is Lyris Thornvale. I was Alara's mother, and I've been searching for you for 26 years, ever since your mother took you and ran into the night." "Why now?" Kael asked, his voice cold and suspicious. He positioned himself slightly in front of Seren, protective. "Why reveal yourself after all this time? Why not come forward when Seren was a child, vulnerable, easier to locate?" Lyris's eyes shifted to him, assessing. "Because the Alpha King has taken a mate now. Word travels fast in the territories, especially word this interesting. When I heard the descriptions, girl raised as a human servant, dormant bloodline that awakened during a fight, gray eyes like winter frost, I knew it had to be Alara's daughter." She looked back at Seren, and there was pain in her eyes. "I knew you'd survived, and I knew you'd finally be visible again, which meant I could find you before someone else did." "My mother," Seren said quietly, her voice barely steady. "What happened to her? How did she die?" Lyris's expression crumbled for just a moment, raw grief breaking through her controlled exterior, before she pulled it back together with visible effort. "She was hunted by the same families who destroyed House Thornvale, who wanted to make sure no one with our bloodline could ever rise again and threaten their control. Your mother ran for years, always moving, never staying anywhere long enough to leave a trail. When she got pregnant with you, she went even deeper into hiding, changed her name, her appearance, everything." Lyris paused, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "And when you were born, when she saw the power in your blood, she did something I'd never seen before, something dangerous and painful and permanent. She bound your wolf, buried it so deep that it wouldn't wake until you found your true mate or faced mortal danger that triggered your survival instincts." "She died protecting me," Seren whispered, remembering Mira's words from weeks ago. "She fought them." "Yes, the hunters finally found you when you were 3 years old. Your mother fought them with everything she had, killed 2 of them outright, but there were too many, and she was alone." Lyris's voice was thick with grief, barely contained. She died buying you time to escape. A servant girl from a nearby village found you wandering in the forest, covered in your mother's blood, and brought you to Thornridge Castle. And you disappeared into the servant population so thoroughly that even I couldn't find you. You became invisible. Tears burned in Saren's eyes, threatening to spill over. She'd never known her mother, had grown up thinking she was just another nameless orphan with no family and no history. But her mother had been a warrior, had died fighting to keep her daughter safe, had sacrificed everything so Seren could survive. "Why are you telling me this now?" Kael asked, still suspicious, still protective. "What do you want from her?" "Because the hunters are still out there," Lyris said bluntly, her voice hard. "And now that Seren's wolf has awakened, now that she's visible again and connected to the Alpha King, they'll come for her, just like they came for Alara, just like they came for every Thornvale who showed even a hint of the old power." "Let them come," Kael said, his voice deadly quiet in a way that made Seren's skin prickle. "They'll find out what happens to people who threaten what's mine." Lyris studied him for a long moment, her gray eyes sharp and assessing. Then she nodded slowly, something like approval in her expression. "Good. Because you're going to need that fire, that absolute conviction. The enemies my granddaughter has inherited don't fight fair, and they don't show mercy." She reached into her worn traveling coat and pulled out a small wooden box, polished with age and use. "This belonged to your mother. She left it with me before she ran, told me to give it to you if I ever found you, if you ever awakened." Seren took the box with shaking hands. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a necklace, a pendant carved from what looked like bone or ivory, depicting the Thornvale wolf symbol in intricate detail, the same symbol from the letter's seal. "There's power in that," Lyris said quietly. "Old magic woven into the carving itself. It won't make you invincible or give you abilities you don't already possess, but it'll help you access your wolf more easily, help you control the shift, especially in the beginning when everything is new and unpredictable. Your mother wanted you to have it when you were ready." Seren closed her fingers around the pendant, and warmth spread through her palm. It felt alive somehow, thrumming with energy she couldn't quite name. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Lyris's expression hardened, all business now. "I'm not here just to deliver sentimental gifts and family history. I'm here to warn you because the danger is immediate and real. The Southern Territory knows what you are now. They're the ones who hired the hunters who killed your mother. They're the ones who funded the destruction of House Thornvale, and they will not let a Thornvale live to threaten their power structure." Kael's entire body went rigid, tension singing through every muscle. "The Southern Territory? You're absolutely certain?" "I have proof, documents, contracts with mercenary packs and hunter guilds going back 3 decades, payment records, written orders to eliminate anyone with Thornvale blood, signed by Lord Morgrave himself." Lyris looked at him steadily. "They funded the systematic destruction of my entire house. And now they're positioning themselves to do the same to you, Alpha King, working through Seren to destabilize your rule." "Then we end this," Kael said flatly, his voice cold and absolute. "Now. Today. We bring this into the light, and we end it." "How?" Seren asked, her mind racing through possibilities and coming up blank. "They'll just deny everything, destroy the evidence. It's been 30 years. "We expose them," Kael interrupted, his eyes sharp with the kind of strategic thinking that had made him Alpha King in the first place. "If the Southern Territory has been secretly funding the elimination of bloodlines, that's a direct violation of the territorial accords. The agreements that have kept the peace between territories for generations. Every pack in the North will turn against them if we can prove it." "You'll need more than just my word," Lyris said. "You'll need documentation, evidence that can't be disputed or dismissed. Can you provide it?" Lyris smiled grimly, a warrior's smile that reminded Seren uncomfortably of Kael. "I've spent 26 years gathering it, tracking down every contract, every payment, every order. I have enough documentation to bury them completely." The revelation came 3 days later at an emergency territorial summit that would be talked about for generations. Kael called every ranking alpha from the entire northern frontier to his castle. Not a request. A summons with the full weight of his authority behind it. The Great Hall was packed with wolves from every territory, eastern, western, southern, northern, and the smaller border packs that usually stayed out of politics. The air was thick with tension and suspicion, wolves eyeing each other warily, wondering what crisis could possibly justify pulling them all together. Seren stood beside Kyle on the raised platform at the head of the hall, wearing a dress in deep midnight blue that Marcus had helped her choose. The Thornvale pendant hung openly at her throat, catching the torchlight. Let them see. Let them know what she was. No more hiding. Elder Varys from the Southern Territory looked smug as he took his place, like he thought this was another opportunity to undermine Kyle's authority and push for the restoration of traditional alliances. He was about to learn a very painful lesson. "We're here," Kyle began, his voice carrying across the hall with absolute authority, "because new information has come to light, information that affects every single territory represented in this room, information about crimes that have been committed against all of us." He gestured to the side door, and Lyra stepped into the hall, carrying a leather satchel that bulged with documents. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, wolves leaning forward to get a better look at the woman who'd been presumed dead for 3 decades. "This is Lyris Thornvale," Kyle continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "The last surviving member of House Thornvale's direct line. And she has evidence that the Southern Territory has been systematically eliminating powerful bloodlines for the past 30 years, in direct violation of the territorial accords, in violation of the most fundamental laws that govern our society." The room erupted into chaos, shouting, accusations, denials. Varys shot to his feet, his face going red with fury and panic. "This is absurd. You can't seriously expect us to believe this fantasy." House Thornvale fell because they challenged the established order, because they were dangerous. "Contracts," Lyra said calmly, her voice somehow cutting through the noise. She pulled documents from her satchel, spreading them on the central table like cards in a deadly game. "With mercenary pacts, payment records showing gold transferred from House Morgrave's coffers to known hunter guilds, written orders to hunt and eliminate anyone carrying Thornvale blood, to make sure no survivor could ever challenge for power, all bearing the official seal of House Morgrave." She threw more documents onto the table, a damning pile of evidence. Wolves surged forward to examine them, suspicion and anger growing with each page they read. Seren watched Varys' face go from smug to panicked to furious in the span of heartbeats, watched him realize the trap was already sprung and there was no escape. "These are forgeries," he sputtered desperately. "Obvious lies meant to discredit the Southern Territory, meant to justify this abomination of a mating." "The seals are genuine," said Alpha Garrett from the Western Territory, holding up a contract with a practiced eye. "I've seen Lord Morgrave's personal seal enough times to recognize it. This document is real, which means all of them are real. And if the Southern Territory has been eliminating bloodlines they considered threatening," added Alpha Thorn from the Eastern Pax, his voice hard, "what's to stop them from doing the same to any of us? To any of our families who show inconvenient power? This isn't just about Thornvale. This is about all of us." The tide was turning. Seren could feel it. The shift in the room as wolves who'd been skeptical or neutral started to see the truth, started to understand the implications, started to get angry. "The Southern Territory has acted in its own interests," Varys said desperately, sweat beading on his forehead. "To maintain regional stability, to prevent dangerous bloodlines from destabilizing the power structure that keeps us all safe. Surely you can understand." "From what?" Kale cut him off, his voice like iron wrapped in ice. "From existing? From challenging your monopoly on power? From having abilities you couldn't control or manipulate? You murdered entire families, Elder Varys, including the mother of my mate, children, elders, anyone who carried the wrong blood, and you call that stability? You call that safety?" The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the stone floor. Seren stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. She'd practiced this, prepared for it. "My mother's name was Alara Thornvale. She died 23 years ago, running from your hunters. She died protecting me because I was Thornvale blood, because your territory decided that anyone with old power was a threat to be eliminated, rather than a person with a right to exist." She met Varys' eyes directly, refusing to look away. "You don't get to decide who deserves to live. You don't get to murder people and their children and call it politics or stability or necessary sacrifice. "The girl speaks truth," said Alpha Garrett quietly. Several other alphas nodded, their expressions grim. "If the Southern Territory has violated the accords this severely, committed crimes this extensive, they must face consequences," added Alpha Thorn. "Real consequences, not just words." "Agreed," said another voice. Then another. One by one, the alphas in the room aligned themselves against the Southern Territory. Varys looked around wildly, his support evaporating like morning mist, realizing he'd lost completely and there was no recovering from this. "The council will convene to decide appropriate sanctions," said Elder Corvin, the same elder who'd challenged Kyle weeks ago, now standing firmly with him. Funny how shared enemies created alliances. "But effective immediately. The Southern Territory is under formal investigation. All existing alliances are suspended until this matter is fully resolved and reparations are made." Varys' face went purple with barely contained rage. "You're making a terrible mistake. All of you. That girl is dangerous. Her bloodline is exactly why House Thornvale had to fall. You're letting sentiment and these forged documents blind you to the real threat." "Is under my protection," Kyle said, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. "As is her entire bloodline, what's left of it. And if the Southern Territory makes any move against her, any action that could be interpreted as hostile, it will be considered an act of war against the Northern Territory. Is that absolutely clear, Elder Varys?" The silence that followed was deafening. Varys stormed out, his few remaining supporters trailing behind him like kicked dogs. The hall erupted in conversation, but Saren barely heard it. She was staring at the documents on the table, proof of her mother's murder, proof of decades of systematic conspiracy and genocide, and feeling something cold and hard and satisfied settle in her chest. Justice. Finally. After 23 years, her mother had justice. The aftermath took weeks to fully unfold, like watching a slow-motion avalanche. The Southern Territory was stripped of its voting rights in the Territorial Council. Lord Morgrave was forced to step down in disgrace, replaced by his younger brother, an alpha who publicly denounced the bloodline purges and promised cooperation with the investigation. Reparations were negotiated and paid to the surviving Thornvale line, which meant Saren, who suddenly found herself with wealth and legal standing she had absolutely no idea what to do with. Lyra stayed in the Northern Territory, teaching Saren about her heritage, her family's history, the magic that ran in their bloodline. It was strange, having a grandmother after a lifetime of having no family at all. But Saren found herself grateful for it. And through it all, through the political chaos and the restructuring of power and the endless meetings and negotiations, Saren learned what it actually meant to be Kael's mate, his equal. She sat in on council meetings now, no longer a silent observer but an active participant. Gave her input on territorial disputes, on trade agreements, on matters of law and justice. Used her new position and newfound status to advocate for reforms, better treatment of servants, protections for dormant bloodlines, transparency requirements for political alliances. Some wolves still hated her, still saw her as an upstart servant who didn't deserve her position, who'd seduced or manipulated the Alpha King into this disastrous mating. But more and more, they saw her as what she actually was, strong, capable, intelligent, and utterly unwilling to back down or play the role they'd assigned her. 3 months after the territorial summit, Kael found Saren in the training grounds late at night. She'd been working with the fighters, learning to fight in wolf form, learning to use her speed and agility instead of trying to match larger wolves in raw strength. "You're getting better," he said, leaning against a post and watching her with undisguised appreciation. "Faster, more confident in the movements." "I had a good teacher." Saren shifted back to human form, breathing hard from the exertion. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. "Still can't beat you in a straight fight, though." "Give it time. You're faster than me, more agile. Once you fully learn to use those advantages properly, to make them tactical instead of just reactive, I'm going to be in serious trouble." Saren smiled, pleased despite herself. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past months, partners first, working together on the endless tasks of governance, allies in the political battles that still raged, but also something more, something deeper that they were both still figuring out how to name. "I got another letter from Lyris," Saren said, toweling off. "She's located some of the surviving Thornvale records that were hidden when the house fell. History, old magic, detailed bloodline information going back centuries. She wants to know if I want to study it, learn what my ancestors knew. Do you? I think so. Seren looked up at the stars, visible now in the clear night sky. I spent my whole life not knowing who I was, where I came from, what I was capable of. Now I have the chance to learn all of it. I'd be stupid not to take that opportunity. You're many things, Seren Vale. Stubborn, reckless, occasionally infuriating. Kael moved closer, pulling her against him. She fit there now, in the circle of his arms, like she'd been designed for exactly that space. But stupid has never been one of them, not even close. Is that a compliment? It's a fact. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. I'm proud of you. What you've accomplished, how you've handled all of this chaos and pressure. You could have run, could have let fear control you, but you didn't. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. That's what made it meaningful. Kael's expression softened in the way it only did when they were alone. You chose to stand and fight. You chose to face your enemies instead of hiding. You chose to become what you are instead of what they wanted you to be. And you won. We won, Seren corrected automatically. Together. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Together, Kael agreed. He kissed her then, not the first time by far, but somehow it felt different, more real, more permanent, like they were sealing something that went beyond words or bonds or political necessity. When they broke apart, Seren realized something had fundamentally changed inside her. She wasn't scared anymore, wasn't constantly doubting her place here, second-guessing every decision, waiting for someone to expose her as a fraud. She'd earned her position, through blood and courage and sheer stubborn refusal to give up or give in. She was Seren Vale, formerly of no house and no name, mate to the Alpha King, descendant of House Thornvale, and she'd become exactly what her mother had died protecting, a wolf powerful enough to change the world around her, not through destiny or fate, not through birth or bloodline alone, but through choice, through courage, through refusing to disappear when the world told her she should. 6 months after the territorial summit, the formal bonding ceremony took place. It was smaller than most Alpha ceremonies. Seren had insisted on that, overruling the advisors who wanted a massive political spectacle. Just the Northern Pack, she'd said, no delegations from other territories trying to curry favor, no performances for distant Alphas, just wolves witnessing two of their own committing to each other in the old way. Seren wore a dress in deep midnight blue that seemed to capture starlight, custom-made by craftswomen who'd stopped looking at her like an interloper and started treating her like their queen. The Thornvale pendant hung at her throat, polished until it gleamed. Her hair fell loose down her back, woven with small silver ornaments that caught the firelight. Kael wore formal leathers marked with the symbols of his house, his hair pulled back from his face, his eyes soft in a way they only ever were when he looked at her. The ceremony itself was simple, stripped of political posturing, ancient words spoken in the old tongue, promises exchanged before witnesses, blood shared in the traditional way, mixing their essences in a bond that went deeper than law or politics. And when it was done, when Seren was formally recognized not just as Kael's mate, but as Queen of the Northern Territory with all the power and responsibility that entailed, the pack howled. It was the most beautiful sound Seren had ever heard. Hundreds of voices raised together, acknowledging her, accepting her, welcoming her home. That night, after the celebrations finally died down and the castle grew quiet, Seren and Kael stood on the walls overlooking their territory. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. In the distance, wolves still howled occasionally, celebrating or patrolling or simply reveling in being alive. Any regrets? Kael asked quietly. Seren thought about it. Really thought about it. About the girl she'd been, invisible, afraid, convinced she was nothing and would never be anything. About everything she'd lost and gained and survived to get here. About the scars she'd earned and the power she'd claimed and the family she'd found. No, she said finally, meaning it completely. No regrets. Not one. Good. Kael pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her from behind. Because I'm not letting you go. Not ever. You're stuck with me now. Possessive much? You knew what you were getting into when you accepted the bond. Seren laughed, leaning back against his chest. He wasn't wrong. She'd walked into a forbidden ritual on a reckless dare, trying to prove she wasn't scared. Had been hunted through the castle and into the forest by the most powerful alpha in the north. Had discovered she was something she'd never imagined, a dormant wolf from a bloodline so powerful it terrified the ruling houses. Had been threatened, attacked, nearly killed more times than she could count. And through it all, she'd found something she never thought she'd have: a home, a purpose. Someone who saw her not as a servant or a threat or a political pawn, but as an equal, as a partner, as a queen. From the nameless girl cast into darkness and invisibility, Saren had risen to become the most powerful woman the northern frontier had ever known. Not because of destiny or prophecy, not because of birth or bloodline alone, but because when the world told her to disappear, to stay small, to accept her place at the bottom, she'd chosen to stand and fight instead. And she'd won. The howling started again in the distance, the pack celebrating below, their voices carrying through the night. Saren tipped her head back and added her voice to theirs, her wolf singing freely under the stars. Her wolf, once buried so deep she didn't even know it existed, now as much a part of her as breathing. Kael joined her, his howl deeper, resonating with hers in perfect harmony that spoke of bonds deeper than words. Together, they changed everything, shattered the old systems, created something new. And they were just getting started. In the morning, there would be more challenges. More political battles to fight, more enemies to face, more changes to navigate. The southern territory was broken but not destroyed. Other wolves would rise to challenge their authority, to test their strength, to see if this new order could actually hold. But tonight, standing on the walls of Thornridge Castle, with her mate beside her and her pack below her, Saren wasn't worried about tomorrow. She'd survived everything the world had thrown at her so far. She'd survive whatever came next, because she wasn't alone anymore. And she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to act despite the fear. Choosing to stand when everything in you screamed to run. Choosing to become something more than what the world said you could be. And Saren Vale, Queen of the Northern Territory, descendant of House Thornvale, mate to the Alpha King. She'd chosen courage, every single time.